Okay, guys, so I guess in closing, when it comes to mashups, bootlegs, re-edits, things of that nature, I want you to understand that this is just the tip of the iceberg because it's based on the song that I chose. You can find other songs, obviously, that might give you more options. You might find other songs that give you less options. It's similar to how you develop your ear as a DJ. Some songs you just know are going to go off because they give you that feeling. Similar to that, some songs you know are going to be great for re-edits because a number of reasons. They have a piece in the breakdown that is just vocals and piano. And as a result, you can take those vocals and piano, you can lift them out of that song, like we did with our different sections here, right? And you can place them over top of a different track. Of course, they have to be in key, or in keys that will work together. You might think about, and it depends on if this is your style or not, if you play house or techno, but tribal house, minimal house, to a degree tech house, and techno, generally speaking, and this is very generally, are kind of minimal by nature. And even if they're not necessarily minimal, meaning they only use 8 tracks to make the actual song, and what I mean by that is, like, to be clear, 8 tracks, so you have 8 things, kick, clap, hi-hat, bass line, some sort of lead sound, whether it be an organ or a stab of some sort, vocal, bongo, and whatever else, tambourine or something. Even if they don't necessarily adhere to that formula, so let's say maybe to make a minimal track it actually might take, and sometimes it does, 50 tracks inside of Ableton. The frequency dominance of them can be taken advantage of. So what I mean by that is, like, my tracks, they're sort of bright and they're sort of melodic, so it can be hard to re-edit them to an extreme because you've got steel drums in there, you've got vocals in there, you've got piano in there, you've got hi-hats in there, you've got bass line in there handling the lows, you've got kick handling the lows. So you have a full spectrum of frequencies there. With things like minimal, tribal house, tech house, and techno, not always, but a lot of times it's very bass heavy. So you can do things with EQ to get rid of the bass of one track and use the bass of another, and the one that you're using the bass of, you might consider getting rid of the highs. You might consider using an auto filter to do that as well. You might consider tech house breakdowns, how they're basically, or can be, hi-hat, clap, or snare, and a vocal. Maybe you could layer that on top of a bass line from another track. You might consider adding different hi-hats. So similar to how we added a kick here, you might add a hi-hat. But instead of having the lows duck out of the compressor, you might have the highs, or a certain frequency notched out of the highs, possibly. The sky's the limit, and the drier the parts, the better. So maybe there's a breakdown in a track that you're looking at that is only vocals. There's no piano behind it, there's no synths behind it, there's no drums behind it. It's just, for some reason, the producer made it that way. You can take those vocals and you can lift that right out of that song and layer it on top of something else. If it's tribal, a lot of tribal tracks lend themselves to being produced on top of, because it's a lot of drum loops. So maybe keep the tribal backbone of it, but do like what I do and add, in my case, steel drums. You might add piano, you might add horns, you might add an epic hard style synth, you might add dubsteppy wubs, you might add future bass LFO chords, you might add whatever you want, vocals and acapella. You might get rid of the kick and add a different kick, or you might add a funky bass line. It's really up to you guys, and it's about developing your ear and hearing parts of tracks where the production gets stripped down. That's usually where a lot of gold can be found. Breakdowns, the track is stripped down. There's no drums, obviously, or very little. Usually not bass, at least, lack of bass. Bass line, kick drums, lower frequency drums, like tom-toms or bongos, congas. You might look at drum intros on tracks. You might look at fusing together different build-ups and different drops, like I did right here. So there's nothing minimal about this build-up, and there's not much minimal about this breakdown, because in this breakdown you hear a marching band kick drum, you hear a very aggressive summer-sounding melodic thing going on, but I found a way to fuse the two, even though it's not minimal. Minimal is where a lot of gold can be found, and a lot of sample kind of mining, if you will, lifting samples out of tracks can be found. But you can do it with maximal parts of songs too, full-on parts as well, like you heard right here. And I think in a previous video I fused two different drops together. You could do that as well. It's about your imagination, guys, and it's about listening to a lot of music and thinking about where two parts of two different songs could fuse together, or where you could layer certain parts of one song on top of certain parts of another. Like I said, vocals on top of a drop, a riff, a signature riff that everybody knows from a song. Even though it's not a vocal, it's an instrument, but everybody knows that sound. And you could layer that on top of another track. One that comes to mind, it's not the best example, but it's just coming to mind right now, and I just want to give you everything that comes into my mind. Saxophone. The minute that I hear sax, I think house. More specifically, I think tropical house, and it puts me, most importantly, hypnosis. It puts me in a tropical mood. You find a way to put sax in a dubstep track, you're going to turn some heads, especially if it works well. You find a way to put a sax in really anything that isn't common, tribal, future bass. You're going to turn some heads, guys, and people are going to think, oh, what's he doing? Or she. Well, they are mashing it up. They're re-editing the track, and it's cool. It's different. It's working. It's getting attention. So, think about those things, guys, as you move forward with this, but don't limit yourself to just replacing the kick. You could replace hi-hats, you could replace vocals, you could layer piano. Whatever the initial track is sort of lacking, and whatever the initial track gives you space to do, take that space. Like I said, with tribal house, I found that that's a great place to add bright instruments to. Super saws, square waves, steel drums, piano, horns, something that's on the mid to upper mid to highs of the frequency spectrum. And why is that? Well, because, guys, the mid to lower mid to lows to sub frequencies are taken up by subby bass lines and big kick drums and bongos and congas and tom-toms and the stuff that makes tribal house. So while some of that spills over into the mids and the highs, the upper ends of those drums, if you will, and they certainly usually use hi-hats, there's room for piano usually, there's room for a saw lead, there's room for all kinds of fun stuff, you know. Try not to rip me off, but, you know, steel drums, marimbas, xylophones, horns, anything you can think of, guys. Find your own sound and run with it, but look for opportunity. I'll see you guys in the next video.